the country found them ready at the stirring call for men.
Hello and welcome to the World War I Summer School documentary. During the week of the 21st to the 25th of July, 24 Arden Academy students took part in a summer school all about World War I. The week consisted of 3 days at school where numerous workshops and talks from experts would take place, and the last 2 days was a trip to Belgium to visit many significant locations of the Great War and to gain a first-hand insight into life in the trenches. The whole event was funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund, and we were all fortunate enough to meet experts on the subject and be able to hold original artefacts from the Great War. This documentary will give you an overview of the whole week and show you exactly what we took part in. We started the summer school at 9 a.m. on Monday morning. We all arrived at Arden School and entered the Smart Centre, where we met everyone else for the first time. After that, we all met David, the man who would lead the summer school. The first activity of the day was a gathering of all the information we currently knew about World War I.
It is with the Treaty of Versailles. Thank you very much. You know that side?
In Versailles.
When? Sorry.
Oh, when? 1919.
We then split up into 3 groups and attended 3 different 1-hour-long workshops. The first of which was all about the default British soldier called a Tommy. We saw all of the equipment and uniform that all Tommies would be expected to wear and carry.
Leather boots.
Leather boots, thank you very much. Leather boots, hobnails on the bottom. Okay? They're not there for kicking people's faces in and leaving nice prints on people's faces, they're for grip. Okay, as you can probably imagine. As you can see, the sole of the boot is leather. On anything other than the pavement out there, it will be slippy slidey. So on grass and mud, you'd have no grip. So just like your football boots, winning studs. Okay?
Some of our group were lucky enough to even put on some of the uniform.
That's a tunic on. You are now wearing the King's uniform. Large pack. And what's important to note here is that time and time again you see people referring to the men having to carry these big packs and things in the trenches and over to attack. You don't. You don't need this. So you take it off. Because again, that's the benefit of this system. You drop this off and you put something else on. You know, it's a modular system. When they say, oh, we have to carry 70 pounds of kit, that includes your uniform and your boots and everything. You know, it is all over your body. It's not all on your back, very much. Polish them without getting polish on your tunic. Thank you very much indeed. Toothbrush, made of bone and animal bone and hair. But of course, you know, plastics are very, very new. There's not many of them. There's only 2 or 3 different kinds of plastic at the time. And animal bone has been used for years because it's easy to shape. It can be smoothed and polished easily. So it can be kept clean easily. It's quite hygienic.
After trying on some more clothing, it was time to see the English standard rifle that was used extensively throughout the war, the Lee Enfield.
Right, here's my rifle. So, holds 10 rounds. It's a bolt action rifle. This is deactivated obviously, or else I wouldn't bring it in. But it does operate, but it doesn't fire. So we open it. Right, thank you. 5 in, push them in, they go into the magazine here. Put the next 5 in, push them in, into the magazine. 1 is in the chamber there. So it needs to be tucked right into your shoulder. I've fired one, it does have quite a kick. Bang. And then I can keep it aimed, reload, fire. Fast firing, isn't it? Even for a bolt, it's like a rifle, it's fast firing.
We finished up by looking at a wide variety of other items a soldier would carry, such as medals, Bibles, and identity tags. We also saw the different types of helmets that were used during World War I, on both the Allied and the German sides. Workshop 1 was complete, so it was time to move on to Workshop 2. Workshop 2 was all about the woman's role in World War I. Firstly, we saw all of the different types of clothes a woman in that era would wear, such as a corset.
These two ladies here, they're perfectly slim. Their bodies are the way they are supposed to be. They don't need anything doing to them to make them any different. They're perfectly nice the way they are, and that's natural and that's healthy. Yes? Women didn't think like that then. Can you see, there's a corset shop in Paris, and Paris was the centre of everything fashionable, and in a lot of ways it still is. That's a corset shop. Can you see the dummies in the window, how tiny the waists are? Absolutely minute.
Some students were even lucky enough to try them on.
You have to put that on.
Right, what? Mind her hair, right. Maid, could you go round to the front and help her do it up, please? And then you tighten very gently. Gentlemen, who's up for a challenge?
I got this then. I'll be the maid. How do you do that?
Is that as tight as you can get it to you? Yeah? Brilliant. Hands behind your back like that. That's it. Feet neatly in front of you. That's it. Perfect. That's excellent posture. Now then, everybody slouch. Can you slouch? No, Lauren can't slouch. So, as well as all the other things that we talked about, this gives her really good posture because she can't do anything other than sit up straight. Away. Perfect. She did it. Marvellous. That's very good. Most people go, but they can't do that.
We then viewed the history of the corset and observed how it changed over the years, especially after the war started. We even looked at how the suffragettes impacted on the war and the history of how the woman got the vote, before finding out what they did to help the war effort. Finally, we looked at the technology found in common houses at the time of the Great War, if you can call it that.
This is on my machine.
Good. Here's my automatic washing machine.
Is that plunging?
What's this?
You got the clothes.
Washboard.
Yeah,
That's a washboard. That's right. So you have a big bar of soap. Hang on, we'll get to that in a minute. That's my vacuum cleaner. You get your corset or you get your petticoat or your underwear, whatever you've got, and you rub your soap on it on there. That's okay.
Sounds like music question.
That. You've got your clothes in there. That's full of water that you've heated on your fire, and you're doing that with it. You're pounding it with that. Okay. That's your washing machine. It was hard work. It was blooming hard work. And then when you've done the washing, which would take you a load of washing at the moment, in my washing machine at home, probably takes about an hour and a half. Pop it in, it's done, I don't have to do anything after I put it in. The machine does it all. I take it out, hang it up to dry, it's done. Then I iron it. To iron it, I plug in the iron, okay? Then I wouldn't have done that. I'd have had an iron, which I'd have had to have heated, over the fire. And then I would have had to keep heating it every time it cooled down. So to do a household's worth of washing would take a woman a whole week to do hard work. So to say that women weren't physically strong, they were.
After a quick lunch break, it was time for our third and final workshop of the day. In this workshop, we discussed every little detail of every country's involvement in the war.
Yes, we know it's less than 100,000 kilometres.
50,000?
Nearly, a bit less.
40.
Spot on. 40,000 kilometres around.
Matthew went through each country on the interactive map and showed where the major battles took place, such as the Eastern and Western Front.
Western Front, 750 kilometres. Just one little stripe in the world. So, name a country involved in First World War.
Germany.
Germany, yes. CIA. And the other side?
Russia.
Russia, yeah. Let's look where Russia is. There's Russia. What about all this in between? What's going on there? Anybody know what's going on there in between Russia and Germany?
There's Austria. Spain, Italy, down.
Spain, Italy are down there. Italy's down there. What are these countries? Who are they?
Greece, the Baltic.
What did you say? Lithuania, yeah. And the Baltics. What are the other Baltic countries? Latvia, yeah.
Estonia.
Yeah. This side was a much, much bigger conflict. As well as Germany, you had Austro-Hungary, which is all this blob here, taking in some of the Balkans as well. As soon as that started, the Russians said, "You invade Serbia, we invade you, we break your head." And the Germans said, no, if you invade Austria-Hungary to defend Serbia, we'll invade you. So the Russians pushed across all this way, all the way from Russia, so the Eastern Front ended up about like that.
After that discussion, we decided to take a trip down to our local church, Knoll Parish Church, to see if we can find any World War I graves. Firstly, we were told all about how the cenotaph in London was only supposed to be temporary, before going over and having a closer look at the war memorial at our location. Our group continued on to visit the Soldiers' Chapel inside the church, where the soldiers from any war can be honoured and remembered.
Now you may notice here, there's more than one repeated name. Look, the Hussars Trooper Arthur Noel Cox, Warwickshire Yeomanry Sergeant Edward Cox. You'll probably find another Smithson somewhere, I think. Not another two, thinking, aren't you? But Knoll is not now a big place, is it? And it was even smaller then. And these are just the men who didn't come home. So think of all the men who did go and come home as well. Isn't it called the wounded? The wounded in body, the wounded in mind, whatever.
Lastly, we walked around the church grounds and visited some of the graves of the brave soldiers that were killed in the Great War.
Royal Air Force was formed from the Royal Flying Corps on the 1st of April 1918. Yes, Stain is the surname. Royal Air Force, 11th of November 1918, age 20. So he's a mechanic, so he's not a pilot, unless they went up in a plane to test the plane. Sometimes the pilots took them up to test the plane, but 11th of November 1918, the day the war ended.
That was really unlucky.
He wasn't the only one. Could have died of illness, he could have had flu or all sorts of things. That's interesting. Because the decision is, as I say, everybody has the same headstone, even if they're buried in this country. But look at this. I wonder if he was discharged. We'll have to look him up, see if we can find out. Maybe he was discharged because of his wounds and then died of his wounds after he had left the army. You need to have this.
His family must have bought.
Did you see David's Dead Man's Penny? David's bought one of those with him.
Yeah, we saw that. It was the red and the blue one.
I've never seen one on a grave before.
After examining a couple of gravestones, we headed back for a plenary session. We each had to state one fact we had learnt today. We managed to fill the whole board. It had been a fun day, but now it was over. Time for day 2. We kick-started the day by being shown some new books containing information on different soldiers that fought in World War I. After a short introduction to the day, it was time for workshop 1 of 2. In this workshop, we learnt a variety of things, such as working in a munitions factory, looking closer at guns and grenades, and finding out more about life on the home front.
To the men of Britain who hadn't gone off to fight, this was your fault. 78 women and children were killed and 228 women and children were wounded. It was the German Navy, I believe, wasn't it? Who bombed along that coast. Nothing will tell you. Know what it is. It's a shoe. What kind of shoe? It's a clog. Fantastic. It is an industrial clog. Can you see what's got on the bottom? They look like horseshoes. They do look like horseshoes, yeah.
Some of us got to wear and walk around in the clogs as well.
Start walking about. Could you just, plonk about in one bit?
We listened to readings from people who lived in the trenches and people who worked in the factories. We were then all shown a World War I era grenade.
It's a grenade, and it's made of several components. The outside, you know what the outside is made of? It's quite heavy, isn't it? Iron, yes. But do you know how it's made? There's lots of different...
do you put like a little base in? No.
There's lots of ways of making things. There's machining and other ways. I don't
So
know.
they make like a mould and then they put it in a kind of template.
That's it, yes, it's cast.
We then looked in more detail at the rifles and machine guns used in the Great War before Workshop 1 was over. It was time to go outdoors. Workshop 2 was all about medicine in World War I. We discovered how injured men were treated and found out each step in the process of triage. Firstly, we found out firsthand why soldiers walked instead of ran across the battlefield. We even tried it wearing most of the kit the standard Tommy would wear.
So if somebody gets injured in the Afghan now, they will be evacuated, they will have a blood transfusion, x-rays, if they need it, plastic surgery and physiotherapy. Yeah? That's the usual thing you get in hospitals, yeah? How much of that would you have had during the First World War? Well done. Yes, they did. The British Army first took field diagnostic X-ray machines into the field at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898.
With 2 stretchers available and an equal number of students, the only thing we could do was a stretcher race. After a little training, of course.
That was easier, wasn't it? Because you're all doing it together. Right, stretcher race, 2 there and back, go! Don't get the guns in the lead. My goodness, gracious me!
Feels our best.
Oh dear, what a bunch of light ones.
After a bit more racing, it was time to look inside the medical tent and see how men were treated.
This is the casualty who's just arrived. I've got to see what's wrong with him. So, first of all, bring him over, have a look on that side, and you'll be taking over another look on that side, see if he's got any wounds on there. You've got all the bacteria and anaerobic nasties that live inside of that mud that's sitting on top of your clothing. It's impregnated into your clothing, so your clothing is filthy.
One unfortunate student got the real experience of a soldier by wearing a respirator and having their mouth probed by old metal tools. After a few more life-saving revolutions were presented, such as a leg crutch and a sling, Workshop 2 was over and we were ready for a well-deserved lunch. We gathered in the atrium for an afternoon of research into some of the men who fought in the trenches.
We will be researching local men who served in the First World War. Some of the names might be familiar to you, but some of the surnames might be familiar to you. You know, families do tend to stick around.
An expert named Graham explained to us how to acquire vast amounts of information about people from very little sources, such as a name or a photo. He used websites such as Ancestry and looked through records to find this information. It was then time to start the research. We logged onto computers and got onto the website Ancestry to try and see what we could find out about these soldiers. The Major handed out lots of different names of soldiers who lived in the local area. It was our job to find out everything we could about them.
I'm researching George Henry Burton from the Royal Warwickshire Regiment. I'm trying to find his military record. I think I found a match, and if I can find something out from these, I might be able to find out his military record.
So I was looking for Arthur Paget, and on the website at first there was nothing about him, so we tried looking at his grade commission, and we found a private in the Royal Warwickshire Regiment that matched him.
I found out that Albert Neville Reed was in the military unit's 61st Battle Royal Field Artillery and was born in Kidderminster, Worcestershire, England.
Charles Bishop was a builder who had a wife, one child, and what they call them, houseworkers. to live with.
Oh, lodger.
And he died, he's injured in another country, but died in this country. He's buried at an old church.
We had all managed to find out lots of interesting facts about the people we were researching, so it was time for a plenary session.
All the names were taken from this book here. Knoll Local History Society, Great War in Knoll, 1914-18. Excellent. Right.
So just to explain what Graham is doing, he looks at the picture and he says, right, that uniform came in then and went out there. But he's wearing a hat that came in then and went out there. He's got a badge that was around then. It's the unit that was only around then. So you look together and you find that all those are only cross-referencing at a time, and you get quite an accurate time by comparing the uniform, badges, helmets, hats.
Finally, it was revealed that some of the men who had lived around here, fought and died in the war, and were researched today. We will be visiting their memorial when we visit Belgium in a couple of days' time.
Frank Aldington and George Henry Burton. Okay? We'll be visiting all those people. They commemorate at Tynecott, on the Menin Gate, Plugstead Memorial, and Liston Military Cemetery. So we'll be visiting all those.
Day 2 was over, and it was finally time for day 3, our final day here in England before we would set off to Belgium.
One, 2, 3.
The beginning of day 3 consisted of a short film shown to us all about the front line and the Battle of the Somme. It showed us all kinds of things, such as artillery pieces and shell fire. We were then ready for workshop 1 of 2. This workshop was all about life in the trenches.
At night you work. Remember, you cannot get out of the trenches during the day, so you can't get out and fix your barbed wire or add more to it. This is pretty much as close as you'll get to an actual action shot. And up here, a shrapnel shell had exploded and has showered hundreds of these down.
We got to view a cross-section of a trench and learn all about the special features of them, such as their zigzag shape to stop invading soldiers from firing down the trench.
Now look, we're in the dogleg bits. That's a fire step there. We'll get up on this one. Yeah, so you see out through the barbed wire. Don't mind the dummy, but of course that may well have been your view.
Next up, we got to see some of the intriguing equipment that was vital for the trenches to operate, such as periscopes, shovels, and barbed wire posts. After a short talk on gas masks, we gathered in the atrium for the next activity. Once we were all present, we were provided with some exciting news. The next activity would be cooking all sorts of World War I food. It was time to enter the kitchen, get on our aprons, and get cooking.
We've always brought the bacon home, no matter what they've done. But we don't want the bacon now. We're out to get the hunt. We don't want the bacon. We don't want the bacon. What we want is a piece of the rye.
We cooked all kinds of delicious meals and treats, such as hardtack biscuits, curry, stew, and macaroni cheese. All foods from the trenches and the home front.
So we're cooking the Anzac biscuit recipe.
Okay, well we've made a apple charlotte, which is kind of like a bread and butter pudding, but just with apples in it instead of, you know, raisins and butter and stuff.
I've made like the process of making the hard tack biscuit. As you get this the dough here, there's columns in the wall for things, and this is one of them.
And make him wiser, we'll have a wonderful time.
After a few minutes of cooking, we were ready to dig in. Let's see how it went.
Don't worry, we're going to set it out about 12, so you might as well leave it here.
Hot and squidgy. Tastes like dry porridge.
That's really nice.
These biscuits, compared to the other biscuits, are great.
Now that every recipe was done, we laid them all out on a table and enjoyed our lunch. The food was complete.
Right, guys.
It must have been very nice. The queue was nearly trailing out the door. Along with the delightful food the students cooked, there were also some crackers, bread and fat, all served up on trays. It sounds as if it went down a treat.
Really nice. Really good. Especially that beef. That was very, very nice.
Although I think they made the hardtack biscuits a bit too hard. Time to see what Sir thinks.
We've got a fantastic tray of foods from the time of the First World War made by the students here at Arden. We have a fish curry, or in modern terms a masala fish, which is a Bangladeshi recipe. So that's cod cooked with spices and flour. Let's have a taste. That's really nice. It's a smooth sauce, quite a mild curry, very pleasant indeed. I'd be perfectly happy to serve that at a curry house. Next we have a stew, a brown stew, a typical English meal of the 19th and even the 20th century. So a beef, carrot and vegetable stew. Well, that's really rather good. Nice and rich. It's not very spiced, but the beef has given lots of flavour. That's a very good stew.
Full marks across the board there, and with that, the cooking was complete. After a little bit more research, it was time for workshop 2. The final workshop of the day was all about the feelings and views of the men at war. We looked at some famous poems and memoirs by Wilfred Owen and various other soldiers.
Not very well saying 60,000 men went over there and all died. A battleship went over there and it exploded. These are people. We need to understand these people. They're people just like us. The German army crossing Europe, burning down a library in Belgium, killing lots of innocent people. So as much as he disliked the thought of killing anybody himself or going to war, he joined the army. And his experiences there in the army, he put into poetry.
Utter out the hasty horizons, no mockeries now for them, no presents.
Some of the students read out extracts from famous poems such as Dulces Decorum Est and In Flanders Fields, some of which were written in the very places we were going to visit when we went to Ypres in Belgium.
There should be the test, the judgment of your eye.
We then watched a video about the last surviving Tommy named Harry Patch. His memorial was one of the places we visited in Belgium. That concluded workshop 2. We then spent the remainder of the afternoon discussing the itinerary of the trip to Belgium and seeing in more detail the places we were going to visit. The 3 days at Arden were complete. At midnight that night, we would set off on our long journey to Belgium for the final 2 days of our World War I summer school. We left Arden in a coach at 12 a.m. and travelled down to Dover. We boarded a ferry and travelled across the English Channel to France, where we drove along the coast all the way to Belgium. Driving through the country, we could already spot numerous cemeteries and bunkers left behind from the war. At 8 AM we arrived at our first location of the day, the 7th Division Memorial. This was a large stone obelisk created to commemorate the actions of the 7th Division throughout the war, such as securing the Zonnebeke Ridge.
Right, we are here. This is the 7th Division Memorial. The 7th Division is almost one of the original divisions of the British Expeditionary Force. It was made up of units which were stationed abroad. In our case, we're particularly interested in the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, as marked here.
We even laid a small cross to remember the soldiers of that division who came from Knoll. We then headed off to our next location. Location 2 was the Passchendaele Memorial Museum, a large museum containing lots of World War I artefacts, such as weapons, shells, and uniforms.
Up to mighty London came an Irishman one day. As the streets are paved with gold, sure everyone was gay, singing songs of Piccadilly, Strand and Leicester Square, till Paddy got excited, then he shouted to them there.
It's out of 4 different gases. You've got chlorine, that's the first one that's used. Combines with the water in your eyes, your throat, your nose, your lungs to form hydrochloric acid, and it burns them.
It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly. It's a long, long way to Tipperary. My heart's right there.
They even had a replica of an entire dugout. Under their trenches, the Allied forces would have a large complex of dugout rooms consisting of storage, bunks, kitchens, war rooms and mechanics to fix guns. All of these rooms were connected by a long tunnel.
Remember, it's the pen that's bad, don't lay the blame on me. It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go.
Industries that build up to supplies. Your man needs this. Your man won't be comfortable in the trenches without, and it just built an industry that builds up to supply soldiers, particularly officers. Map case here, so again, something an ordinary soldier would have.
It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. It's a long way.
After the dugout, the museum continues with more artefacts, such as artillery, equipment, and even paintings.
It's a long way to Tipperary, for the sweetest girl I know.
We're looking for 7th Division. Their symbol is that one. Yes, well done, well spotted. Initially, my uniform, if you remember, is quite plain. There's no badges on the arms and things. But later, as they get more and more soldiers, they wear these divisional flashes here on their arms and the sleeves. It's like a code. So you might have a divisional flash, and then you might have a ribbon which denotes which regiment you're in as well. So you're identifiable to your own side.
Should you not receive it right, and let me know if I make mistakes in spelling Molly dear, said he. Remember, it's the pen that's bad, don't lay the blame on me. It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go.
top of all of that, they even had a replica of a trench featuring everything, such as the firing step, bunkers, ladder-like floorboards and barbed wire.
Well, I hope you've come away with an idea how confusing it all is. Everywhere looks the same. How claustrophobic it is. You know, that's your world for a few days, is that bit of sky, isn't it?
We then set off to go to location 3, Tyncott Cemetery.
You'll see it in a minute. We'll go for that building on your left there, which is the visitor centre, and we'll see various things. But you'll actually, when you look through the visitor centre, there's a big panoramic window. You look through that window, you're looking over the battlefield, so you'll get the idea. But just while we're here, you can see if we're in trenches at the top here, as the Germans were. If you're advancing from this direction, you are walking uphill with all your stuff, and they can see you coming all the way, and so they can shoot at you all the way.
Tyncott Cemetery is a large burial ground for the dead of the First World War in Ypres, outside Passchendaele near Zonnebeke. It is the largest Commonwealth military cemetery in the world, with 8,907 soldiers from the United Kingdom, all from World War I. There is a total of 11,954 burials, 8,367 of which are unnamed. At the back of the site is a large memorial wall. Inscribed on it is over 33,000 UK soldiers, plus 1,176 New Zealanders, all of which are missing. We then laid a wreath to commemorate the soldiers buried here who were from Knowle and fought right here in Ypres.
These men of Knowle will not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. They're going down the sun in the morning. Arden. We will remember. We will remember.
We continued through the cemetery, passing the only 4 German graves until we arrived at the Wall of the Missing. Once there, we laid crosses addressed to the men from Knowle whose bodies could not be found. It was then time to leave.
In and around this area, and were brought in from outlying cemeteries, brought in and concentrated in one full cemetery.
The next place we visited was the Langemark German Cemetery, where many German soldiers were buried. As you enter the site, there is once again walls containing thousands of names, the names of which their bodies were not recovered. At the centre of the site is a mass grave containing 24,917 soldiers, 7,977 of which remain unknown. There are over 9,000 graves located around that.
Were inspired, after the war, they were inspired by a picture that was published in 1918 of German soldiers mourning for a comrade they were burying. And we think we can see the similarity in the mood. It's quite sombre, isn't it? I think we have to bear in mind the difference between German and British sort of symbolism about things as well. You know, the crosses that are here, they're very Germanic crosses. They look like forest crosses. This is very deep in German psyche. This goes right back to pre-Roman times and all sorts of things.
We then proceeded to lay another wreath.
Sleep, and my song shall build about your bed a paradise of dimness. You shall feel the folding of tired wings, and peace will dwell throned in your silence. And 1 hour shall hold summer, and midnight, and immensity lull to forgetfulness. For, where you dream, the stately gloom of foliage shall embower your slumbering thought with tapestries of blue. And there shall be no memory of the sky, nor sunlight with its cruelty of swords, but to your soul that sinks from deep to deep, through drowned and glimmering colour, time shall be only slow rhythmic swaying, and your breath, and roses in the darkness, and my love. That was Slumber Song by Siegfried Sassoon.
After that, we boarded the coach and travelled to the next location. This was the Harry Patch Memorial. Harry Patch was the last surviving Tommy of World War I. He died in 2009, but before then, he set up a small memorial just next to the road.
Right, this is the Harry Patch Memorial. Harry Patch, as you may know, was the last surviving Tommy, the last man left alive who had fought on the Western Front, and he died 2009, I think it was, at the age of something like 111, 112. Okay? 111, that's it. So, 2008, he comes and he pays for this memorial himself. He's brought here by friends to unveil it, and here it is. It marks the spot where the 20th Light Division attacked. Across the Steenbeck here, ignore there's a lake there behind it, ignore that. Across this Steenbeck here, and across the fields, across the rise there towards the fortified village of Langemark. That's stuffed with Germans with machine guns, etc. Number 29295, C Company, 7th Battalion Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry, the last surviving veteran to have served in the trenches of the Western Front. And if you want to know what this looked like about the time that Harry attacked, this photograph here is the Steenbeck. This is what it looked like, and this is where they got those ideas from.
We then travelled to a place called Essex Farm, another small cemetery, but there are also some replica bunkers. We looked inside the claustrophobic shelters which would have been places of refuge for the soldiers of the trench that used to run through here. Inside were many crosses laid to commemorate the men who fought and died here over 100 years ago. We then heard some poetry written by the soldiers.
In Flanders fields the poppies blown, between the crosses I will know,
that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below.
We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe,
To you from failing hands we throw the torch, with yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
We decided then to enter the cemetery itself and inspect some of the graves.
Sergeant A.G. Cohen with the West Yorkshire Regiment. Okay, and again, people have followed the tradition of putting stones on the top, and also that little handmade memorial here. Look. Okay, 14th of January 1916, aged 15. How many of you are 15? Fancy fighting in a war, boys?
Jack probably.
Of course we don't. Okay. Not gone from memory or from love. And he certainly hasn't gone from memory, has he? Because we're still here remembering him today, aren't we?
Yeah.
The day was going fast, so it was about time to move on to the next location, the Yorkshire Trench. This was a reconstructed trench from the remains of an original trench. However, we were not allowed in it as a dugout had just been discovered underneath it, and so more renovation work was currently in action. We were even lucky enough to meet the man who discovered it and see some photos of what he had found.
We're very fortunate. We're very unfortunate in the sense we can't get into the trenches today, but we can see why. They're clearly not safe to go into on this day. They need to be repaired. However, we are very fortunate because we just happened to have stumbled across the man here who found the dugouts 20 years ago. So I'm sure, your name, sir? Patrick. Patrick is going to give us some show us some photographs of the excavation and what he found.
I do 40 years metal detection, and 20 years ago do metal detection here. And I found a small hole in the ground. Here was a small hole in the ground. There was the beginning. Small hole in the ground. You see? Small hole in the ground.
It was nearing 8 PM, so we set off to our next place to visit, the Menin Gate. The Menin Gate is a very large archway with a road through it. It is also a massive memorial for those whose bodies could not be found during World War I. It bears a total of 54,896 names. 40,244 from the UK, 6,198 Australians, 6,983 Canadians, 414 British Indians, 564 South Africans, and 6 British West Indians. Every single day, right there at 8 PM, they perform the last post and lay a wreath to commemorate all of those names. Arden Academy were lucky enough to lay their own wreath there today. The short service was about to begin.
Welcome to the ceremony acts of remembrance. May we please ask to remain silent and not to applaud during or after the ceremony. Thank you.
The ceremony was over. It was now our job to commemorate more of the soldiers who were from Knoll and the Royal Warwickshire Regiment.
So Smitten there is, W.H. Smitten. George Frederick Brown. Spine water. Yeah, right there.
Let's read some of the others.
We're going to check what regiments are in. Right, you might there's a European. Right, okay, have we got everybody? 1, 2, we've got 24. Right, what we're going to do.
We then embarked on the last walk of the day, the ramparts. We walked through the town and over the ramparts to see some of the smaller locations in Ypres, the first of which was the Indian Memorial.
Aubers Ridge, Morval, Luce, the Somme, Neuchâtel, Delville Wood, Armentières, Festubert, Saint-Julien and Flers.
We continued the walk and came across the Lille Gate, a small bridge over a road. This is the site where the trench newspaper called the Ypres Times was written.
This is the Lille Gate. I spoke to you about the Ypres Times. It's printed here in these ramparts and casements that... Hello? Ramparts and casements, the walls, the rooms inside here.
We arrived at the final location of the day, the Rampart Cemetery. This was a small cemetery overlooking a river where people rowing boats could be seen. We spent the last 10 minutes as the sun went down, each in a quiet spot, reflecting on the events of the day and thinking about all of those brave soldiers who gave their lives. The busy day was over. We returned to the hotel to get some well-earned rest, ready for day 2. We got up bright and early and headed to the first location of the day, St. George's Church, a small church in Ypres with many memorials to the soldiers of World War I. We all had a look around at the many different memorials and plaques on the wall before taking a seat. At the back of the church was a special memorial to a soldier called Bruce Bainsfather. He used to draw cartoons during the war that boosted the morale of the troops and became very famous. It was time to move on to the next location, the In Flanders Fields Museum.
Good evening, people. The skies are full of sausage strips, Napoleon, Ypres.
This was a special interactive museum where we were all given electronic wristbands. At the start, we entered details such as our last name and our language, and the museum would then present information accordingly when we scanned those electronic wristbands into computer terminals.
His luggage labeled England, his program nicely set. He shouted first stop Paris, but he hasn't got there yet.
We once again observed lots of different artifacts such as coins, medals, weapons, uniforms, and even propaganda posters.
And when John Bull starts to hit, he may never sit upon it anymore. But Belgium put the guy was on the Kaiser. Europe brought the cane and made him sore. And now he's landed in the woods. We won't buy his German goods, and we'll never taste his lager anymore. Rule Britannia! Now the Kaiser ought to go to school and learn his geography. He quite forgot our colonies and our hands across the sea. He'll find we hold 4 acres that will feed his game at nap. Why he didn't notice England is the smallest on the map.
There was a small cinema inside the museum telling the horror stories of the war, such as how soldiers used to kill themselves to escape the great conflict.
And though the Kaiser made the war, executing Belgium put the kibosh on the Kaiser. Europe dropped the cane and laid him sore. And will soon shout out with joy, hold your hand out, naughty boy. You must never play at soldiers anymore. But Belgium put the kibosh on the Kaiser. Europe dropped the cane and laid him sore.
They even had carefully crafted models of the trenches, the dugouts and the front lines.
That's a British one.
Time was of the essence, so we travelled on to the next stop, the St. Uli craters. The St. Uli craters were two giant bomb craters created by explosives in the First World War. They have now turned into lakes. One of these craters was created by the largest single explosion of World War I.
You then tunnel along underneath the ground. 55 feet deep these shafts were.
David explained to us that there was a giant underground war being fought beneath the trenches. Both sides dug under each other, secretly laying mines to blow up the trenches above. There would often be crossovers and many fights would start, so soldiers would go down to help the fight. The 50 tons of explosives placed under the German trench was what helped the Allied forces capture the nearby towns. Right next to those craters was a small bunker. We all had a look inside and heard some more poetry inspired by the war.
I had a comrade. In battle he was my comrade. None better I have had. The drum called us to fight. He always on my right, in step through good and bad. A bullet, it flew towards us. For him, or meant for me. His life from mine it tore. At my feet a piece of gore, as if a part of me.
The time had come to visit another memorial site, the Ploegster Memorial. This was another burial site for the dead of World War I. At the centre is a large stone structure which is a memorial to the missing with over 11,000 names on it. Once again, some were from Knoll and fought here in Belgium in the Ypres salient.
Here. Charles, I am your great-nephew, Sean, your sister Phyllis's grandson. Your sister always spoke fondly of you, remembering how you would throw her between you and your brothers. She, like I and my sons, are mightily proud of you for serving our country in the Great War. But it is with great sadness that we remember you falling during the conflict in France, so far from home. It is there that this letter should find you, delivered by a lovely lady called Scylla, who found where you are laid to rest. You are remembered on the War Memorial in St. Column, and it will be my proud honour to place a cross with your name on it during special commemorations in a couple of weeks. One day myself and family will visit you in person and pay our respects. With much love, Sean and family. Now, I've only seen that because somebody opened the cemetery register here, but it's another example of how personal this all is, isn't it? You know, this is people 100 years ago, and yet people feel an immense connection with them down the line. Look, his sister's grandson is writing this letter.
We then laid another cross to commemorate the deaths of them men who fought from Knoll. We travelled to the next location, the site of an event known as the Christmas Truce. The Christmas Truce is one of the biggest stories of the First World War, as some of it just could not be validated. It's said that on Christmas Day, not a single shot was fired, and some even say that both sides played football together.
24th of December, we will relieve the Royal Dublin Fusiliers in the trenches this evening. So around here, in the trenches here, they relieved, the Royal Dublin Fusiliers came out, the Royal Warwicks came in. 25th, Christmas Day, local truce. British and Germans intermingle between the trenches. Dead in front of the trenches buried. No shot fired all day, no casualties. That's it. That's all the 1st Battalion of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment War Diary says about the Christmas Truce. And yet it's one of the biggest stories of the war, isn't it? In terms of football, there is next to no evidence at all to suggest there was any football took place. which is interesting in itself. Sometimes stories attach themselves to actual history and become more important than the history themselves. Some men say, well, how could you play football on a ground, it would be planted with crops like this, winter crops, but low sort of crops like parsnips or whatever like this. How could you play football on a field like that that's muddy, clayey, wet? You know, it was the conditions I've talked about. The khaki chums, they marked it, they actually had to get out of the trench and give in because they were up to their knees and higher in cold, icy cold water. The soldiers didn't have that choice though, did they? Okay, that's stick it out.
The day was drawing on, so it was time to visit the penultimate location, Talbot House. We watched a small video that explained what the house was for and why it was well known. After that, we could have a look around the house itself as well as the gardens. Talbot House was a special house in Ypres. What made it special was that it was a soldiers' club where they can go and relax in their off hours during the war. Normal officers and soldiers of different ranks could not intermingle or even talk to each other. However, Talbot House was a place where soldiers left their rank at the door and everyone was classed as equals. People have freedom there to write letters home, drink tea and meet with friends and family. The club is still in operation now with guest rooms that can be rented out. The house still had the same 100-year-old piano that they used to play back then. It still works to this day. There were also many funny plaques around the house.
Girls discover him and just smother him with things he likes, but girlies act so shy. When Colonel passes by, he holds his head so high with dignity.
There was even a chapel at the top floor of the house.
With an eagle on your shoulder, or a private with a chicken on your knee. I'd rather be a private than a colonel in the army. A colonel out in France can never take a chance, for though his job is great, he dare not make a date. All that he can do is just follow, then hesitate. But privates meet the ma, and then they greet the pa, and then they ooh-la-la with Queen Marie. So would you rather be a colonel with an eagle on your shoulder, or a private with a chicken?
The day was nearly out, so we exited through the small gift shop and set off to the final location of the whole trip. The final location of the whole trip was the execution pole and the prison cell.
We're visiting a place now which is an execution spot. In here are the cells where the British soldiers condemned to be shot for various military crimes were held, and there's also the very post that they were tied to be shot. Now, some of those men, we look at them case by case, they will have been shell-shock cases. Some of them maybe less so. But let's go in and let's think about what it must be for anybody, because people are still executed today. So let's think about for anybody what it must be like their last night on earth. And you're spending it in a cell like this.
We saw what life was like in those tiny dark prison cells, and even saw the genuine engravements and scratchings on the wall of all of the soldiers who were put in there before being shot at dawn.
But he was held in the cells there. He was brought through this short distance around here. Firing party, 5 men. You were all given 5 men. You were all issued with a rifle. Sometimes they did a thing where they issued some men with blank rounds. So the rifle was already loaded. You didn't know whether you got blank or live rounds. Blank would just go bang. Live ones would have the bullet in.
However, when you fire the rifle, you would know, because a blank round has no kick. A live round has a kick into your shoulder, so you feel it. You would probably be from the man's own unit, or certainly from his division. So it might be somebody you knew. They'll bring the man out from the cells. He'll be stripped of all his rank. If he was a sergeant, he'll be torn off with the road march to various points of history. They'll bring him through here, tie him to the post. An officer would pin a piece of white cloth over his heart, and square cloth over his heart, the target. He'll be blindfolded, or sometimes not, if they chose not to. The chaplain would say prayers, read his last rites, tied to the post, and then the firing party would put the command of the officer. We order them to load, present, and then that's what I call it, aim, and then you call fire.
We had finished our last location, and it was time to leave.
To close, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, for listening, and behaving really very well this week and these 2 days. You've taken in a lot of information, you've pushed different pillars of post. I know we've done that. I know it's been long. So well done. I'm sure there'll be special moments for all of us who reached up the board. Joe, you playing that piano there was just a right old thing. I think what men must have played that piano, and yeah. But for all of us, I'm sure there's something. Seeing your enthusiasm for researching your man was something special. And we're heading back home, back to our families, because we can. Okay, but on the Meningate there are 55,000 men on the Meningate alone who could, 35,000 men on the Tyne-Cop Memorial who never did. You know, and all the men who are buried there as well. So we can do that, we have the luxury of doing that.
And with that, our time in Belgium drew to a close, as well as the whole week of summer school. We packed up and started the long journey home. It had been an intriguing, engaging and memorable week, one I'm sure we won't soon forget. We had learnt a multitude of information about World War I, and we have visited locations most people have not seen before. A special thanks to David for leading most of the week and his array of vintage artefacts. Matthew for added information, poetry and leading workshops. Jill for leading workshops and showing us different artefacts and clothing. Graham for his help in research and his World War I medical knowledge. Miss Alton for organising and running the week, and Miss Lett and Miss Stewardin who helped out throughout the whole week.